Hi, I'm Katy Raines. I'm CEO and founder of Indigo Limited. We are audience specialists and we've been working with culture, arts and heritage organisations for over 20 years. So today my mission is to demystify the confusing world of arts marketing. Or is it audience development? Or is it audience engagement? I'm sure you've all heard many of these words chucked around. And many of them you possibly won't have a clue what they are or how they might be different from each other. And if you're new to the sector or haven't been in an organisation where these things have been clearly explained or structured, don't be worried if you're confused about it. I'm going to try and make it all a bit clearer today. So let's at least put a bit of structure on all of that for a start. Firstly, these are all the words people use to talk about who you are trying to serve. Who is it that you're doing what you're doing for? Some organisations call these people their visitors, especially if they're visual arts organisations, while others, such as theatres, call them audiences. For some organisations, the people they're doing it for are other businesses, so they might be called customers. And it may be that your funders are a really influential part of who you are doing this for. So words like stakeholders tend to be used in that context. Then we've got all the jargony things that people call what you create, like artistic output, product, programming, etc. I'm not an artist or on the artistic output side of the sector, so I'm not going to go into this much, other than to say I'm a big fan of plain English and just telling people in a simple and straightforward way what they're going to experience. We'll come back to that later. Then, if you're not confused enough already by all of that, lots of people involved in marketing communications tend to use lots of jargony words and come up with numerous and varied terms to talk about the tools they might use to tell people you want to tell about the stuff you're doing for them. Sometimes there are good reasons for this, so that we're very precise in our language, but sometimes it can all get a bit silly. My favourite one's SEO, search engine optimization, dreamt up, I can only assume, by some techie in Silicon Valley. As I'm sure you know, this is basically designing your website so that people can find you easily. And then finally, you need to know whether what you're doing is working. So there's all this stuff in here like evaluation and research, which is actually my thing. But it can all sound a bit baffling at times. And I, for one, spend my life trying to make it a bit simpler. And then this stuff in the middle is what some people call the process of doing all of that. In the olden days, it was simply arts marketing, but then it became audience development, and more recently it's become audience engagement. It's pretty much all the same thing. So you need to decide what works best for you, but be aware that others might use different terminology. But basically, what we're talking about is how we connect people with art, with artistic, cultural, and creative experiences in order to make the world a better place for all of us. So whatever you like to call it, marketing, audience development, audience engagement, or something else, that's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to try and give you a framework and some sensible thoughts around all of this that I hope will be useful. We've only got about 45 minutes, so I'm going to share with you what I think are the most important principles and ideas for you to get a hold of, and which I think are the foundations of all the more complicated stuff which can come later. But I've been working with arts and audiences for long enough to think that most of this stuff is largely common sense. It doesn't need to be complicated, but it does need to be structured, focused, and clear. I'm aware that some of you watching this will have never done any marketing or audience development before, whilst others will be much more experienced. I hope there's something useful in here for all of you. We're going to focus on the principles today, but I'll throw in some examples along the way. Because you're all so different, it might be easier to explore specific examples with you when we meet on the Q&A. If you have questions about how to apply what I'm saying, examples to share, or other things to explore, please note them down as you watch this and bring them along. Okay, so we're going to start with the who and the what. So the first way of looking at this is, what are you going to deliver to who? In my experience, many artists and creatives start with the art that they want to produce, And then they turn to the marketing, publicity and audience development people, or whoever's in charge of promotion, to go and find the people to come to it. That is what's known as a product-led approach. And in my opinion, it doesn't work. Here's why. The artistic experience is defined in terms of the art or product first. And then we have to find people who will be interested in that. Any good marketer is going to ask, who are my best bets to get to come to this show or artistic experience? And those best bets are inevitably people who've an interest in arts and culture or who've probably been to something similar before. These people have generally had the opportunity of a better education, a higher income, and have had positive experiences of culture in the past. These highly engaged people make up only around 17% of the West Midlands population. I know because I've looked at it, but we'll come back to that a bit later. So that's really not very many people, and it isn't going to change the world, is it? Aha, I hear you say, but we're going to create something really different that's going to attract not those people, but a whole bunch of other people. Great. But how do you know it's going to attract those other people who have traditionally not engaged in culture before to any great degree? And if it doesn't attract either, you're in real trouble. No one has connected with any culture, the world certainly hasn't been changed, and you're skinned. So if you think, and I hope you don't, that starting with the art without any reference to the audience is the way to do this, it's not going to work. It really isn't. So what about another approach? Let's start with the who and then work out what you're going to design for them. Surely that's a winning formula. Well, it might be, but it's not without its challenges. Let's take the example of those people who don't currently fall into that high engaged segment of people in the West Midlands, so around 83% of the population, or the people who fall into the low engagement category, which is about 45%. I do lots of research with lots of people, and there are two problems here. People have real trouble telling you if they're interested in something that they've never experienced before. Often, these people don't have a vocabulary around arts and culture. So they're unlikely to tell you what they really want, or what they really need is a piece of immersive video art. Now, I know there's lots of really interesting co-created work going on, and that's certainly one way of tackling this. It also has some really interesting results. It's long-term stuff though, and it doesn't happen overnight. And the co-creation model is one example of what this diagram shows, but it's not the only one. We're basically looking for a situation where we know enough about the who, the people we're aiming to engage with, that we can develop artistic and creative work and responses that are relevant to them. This might be through co-creation, but it could also be through fact-finding, a bit of research, some listening, and a lot of common sense. Here are some of the questions you'll need to ask to get to that position. On the left we have, this is the first bit of jargon from me, your target audiences. Here's where you'll need to describe quite clearly and in some detail the people that you want to engage with. And I'm afraid everyone is not okay. The clue is in the title, target audiences. This means we're selecting certain groups of people that we want to engage with in order to talk about your work. And for each of those groups, so you might need to do this 5 or 6 times, you will need to know, who are they? Be specific about that. What do they get excited by? What are they struggling with? What do they currently engage with and do? What else do they do in their leisure time? Where can you find them? And on the right is a statement of what you offer and how it is relevant to those audiences. What are you offering? How will this make a difference to those target audiences? What would be the consequences for those people if their needs were left unmet? Where else might they look to meet these needs or to get the excitement that they seek? How will you meet those needs better than the other alternatives? Can you see how this is different from either starting with the art and trying to find people who want to see it, or simply pandering to the whims of what people say they want without really understanding what could be on offer to them. So where might you start to find some of this information? And how would you go about it? I have 3 examples to show you. Audience spectrum is a segmentation of the population, splitting it into 12 segments. This is based on their level and type of engagement with arts and culture. There are 3 highly engaged segments, 3 partially engaged, and 4 low engaged segments. And they all have pretty silly but quite useful names. They've been created by some clever maths which takes someone's postcode, puts them into a socio-economic category, and then cross-references this with answers to an annual survey about how people attend or participate in arts and culture. And this gives us 12 groups of the population who behave in different ways. On the Audience Spectrum website, there are brief descriptions of each one. It tells you what they're like and how best to engage with them. This is not a model for understanding your existing customers. In my opinion, it won't help you much with that. But it will help you to understand who is out there in your population or your catchment area, what they need and how you might engage with them. And because it's based on postcode, we can see how many of them there are in any particular area or region. So the graph on the right shows that there are only 17% of the population of the West Midlands in the highly engaged segments, compared with 26% in England as a whole. But there are 45% in the low engaged segments, compared with 35% in England. You can get this breakdown for any area, so you can start to see the makeup of the population. There's a free dashboard and tools to start using on the Audience Agency website. And if you're a national portfolio or funded organisation of the Arts Council, you can get your own dashboard that's personalised to your organisation. The second thing that's really useful is something called an area profile report, again provided by the Audience Agency, but you do have to pay for it. If you're working in a particular geographical area, you can ask for a report based on that area or the catchment area that you serve. This report will show you all the key statistics about people living in that area, and there's more than enough to get you started. As well as giving you the percentages that there are in each of those audience spectrum segments, it will also tell you what proportion of the population goes to each art form. It will give you demographic information like how many families there are with children, people with different ethnicities, and people's social grades. And you can even break it down by postcode sector. So if you wanted to find specific postcodes, for example, where there's lots of families with children, you could go and find them in this report. I love these reports and I use them with lots of different clients. And finally, here's an example of how we use some of these principles to create the approach used for the Birmingham 2022 festival. It started from understanding the population of the West Midlands by doing a deep dive into all the data that we had about those people. We identified 3 main types of people in relation to their engagement with culture. Firstly, there's the segment that's had limited choice. They've had very little access to culture. Their choices are limited by transport, location and cost, but also by feelings of identity or lack of relevance, or even feeling safe. And of course, this is the segment that's been most financially affected by COVID and now by the cost of living crisis. The next segment we've called social choice. These are people whose cultural choices are largely influenced by family, social and community priorities. They're more likely to engage in culture in a wide range of spaces, including some cultural spaces, but the majority of which are not in traditional cultural venues. And then we've got the unlimited choice segment. These are the people who've traditionally had a lot of access to culture. They probably attend a wide range of events in the West Midlands and possibly further afield, such as London. Their cultural choices are based on their personal interests and perceptions of quality, and they're probably the least financially affected by both COVID and the cost of living. We also identified the main needs and wants of these audiences by talking to people who were working directly with people in communities. 3 main themes emerged. The first was the need for identity. People need to see themselves, people like them. They need experiences that are relevant to them. And they need spaces and places where they feel comfortable or that are already familiar to them. Then there's confidence. People need confidence in the quality of the work they're seeing, but they might need confidence to try something that's new to them, or even confidence to travel to a new place. They need confidence that it's going to feel safe for them, whatever that means. And then thirdly, there's connection. People need to feel welcome. They want to feel part of a shared experience. And with things like the Commonwealth Games, they want to feel that connection across the world with our shared humanity. So we put those 2 things together, the themes and the segments, into a framework that could be used for promoting and designing events for the Commonwealth Games Festival. This was used to inform artistic choices and marketing communications. The table you can see now shows how those themes need to be adapted for each of the target segments. Activity and messaging will need to be different to respond to the specific needs of each of those groups. If you've heard Lindsay Cook speak, who's leading the marketing for the Birmingham 2022 festival, she will show exactly how this has been done. It's been translated into campaigns and communications across the festival. So we've done the who and the what. Now we need to think about the how. How will you connect with these people? Again, we have a plethora of tools and jargony words and choices that you might have, and it's all quite overwhelming, isn't it? And it all sounds rather expensive. I'm sure this list isn't exhaustive, particularly in the digital area, and there are things emerging and changing all the time. The danger here is thinking that you have to do everything. And if someone else is using a tool or a channel that you're not, it feels like you have to keep up with the Joneses and that you're failing in some way if you're not. The trick is to find the tools and methods that work for you and the people that you want to engage with them, and stuff everybody else. But how do you decide which tools to use and which to ditch? Well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first is to understand how and when these tools might be used. And there is a bit of science, consumer psychology behind this. Not all of these tools are going to be useful for every purpose. And a bit like a toolbox, the trick is knowing which tool to bring out when you most need it. This is something called the AIDA model. It's a very widely used tool in marketing. It's based on the psychology of how people make decisions to buy or engage with something. Firstly, people need to be aware of your product or service. So think about all the advertising that you've seen that just simply makes you aware of something. Because if somebody isn't even aware of what you offer, then you're not going to be able to persuade them to buy it. Some of the big budget generic and brand advertising is all in this area, and it's often a huge chunk of a marketing budget. So you'll typically find lots of TV and radio advertising, outdoor billboards, poster sites, ads on buses and tubes and trains, large newspaper adverts, and some really annoying digital ads that pop up when you're trying to read articles on newspaper sites. I'm aware that very few of you will have big budgets to spend on this kind of thing. So you'll have to think very carefully about how you do raise awareness of what you do. But I urge you to think about that because it's a really important part of this model. The principles are basically that awareness stage promotion tends to be eye-catching, simple, with bold colours or imagery, stops you in your tracks, and focuses on a simple, we're here kind of a message. Not lots of detail or information. It's just about making people aware of who you are and what you're offering them. Once you're aware of something, you then need to be encouraged to take an interest in it and find out a bit more. So this is where I would encourage you to find what is called, another bit of jargon, social proof. Other people talking about it through PR, social media, influencers, using the channels where those people will be found. You can use your channels to place some of this social proof back to people. Your channels don't need to just be your voice. What you're trying to do at this stage is show people how what you're offering meets their needs and how people similar to them have come to that conclusion. So thirdly, we have the step which is about shifting someone from liking something to wanting it. And this is potentially the trickiest bit. This is where you have to work really hard to demonstrate your relevance and how what you're doing is going to excite them, not just meet their basic needs. If you have direct connections with people through mailing lists or social media contact or by phone or whatever, this is where you need to leverage that. Personalised one-to-one communications are key. If you know anything about the people from past behaviour, maybe on your database, this is where you can use some of that to make the language and the content of what you're talking about really specific to them so that that relevance really comes through. And then finally, there's the call to action stage. At this point, you're trying to get the person to make a commitment or to do something. You need to be really clear what your calls to action are. It could be booking or reserving a ticket. It could be joining a priority mailing list. Asking someone to book a ticket might be a step too far for somebody who you've only just introduced yourself to. So maybe requesting an online brochure or joining the mailing list is the call to action you're looking for. The online equivalent, of course, is an abandoned basket on a website. Someone's actually got to the point of choosing what you're offering and then not bought it. And of course, in the digital space, you can take someone from the awareness phase through to action much more quickly. So for example, a poster that has a QR code on it could take somebody straight to the booking page. I've seen people recently putting QR codes onto their season brochure pages for each of the shows that are on the pages, which is a smart thing to do, and it takes people directly to the information about that show and how to book. The key point about the action stage is that you're trying to nudge people into doing something now. So this is where things like sales promotions, time-limited offers and things like that come into play. Early bird offers are really good in this space as well. And very targeted or personalised digital advertising can also work really well here. However, what doesn't work is if you try to force the action stage onto someone when they haven't really been through the other stages of awareness, interest and desire. This is why so many last-minute 2-for-1 deals on theatre tickets don't work. You're chucking free tickets at people who don't even know that they want it. However cheap it is, or even free, you won't nudge them into coming. So whatever the size of your budget, or your team, or your resource, you still need to think about each of these stages and what you can do at each stage. I hope that helps. There's loads of resources on the AIDA model. You just need to put it into Google and you'll find lots of examples and lots of organisations and companies using it. So this slide just takes the example of Six the Musical and gives you some examples of which bits of marketing collateral have been used at each of those stages. At the awareness stage, they did a performance at West End Live, an outdoor free event. At the interest stage, it was lots of PR and lots of social content. At the desire stage, they sent direct emails to subscribers. And at the action stage, there were daily rush ticket reminders from the ticket agent. Right, so hopefully you're clear about all of that, just in time for me to confuse you a little bit. Marketing communications can work at a brand level or at a product level. It's important to understand how and when to use each. Brand is one of those words that you'll hear a lot of people talking about, and again, it can be really off-putting. So these are all brands, right? They're from big companies or charities. They probably have millions to spend on advertising. But we're not like that, so what has this got to do with us? The way I would like you to think about brand is different. If we go back to our slide about connecting people with artistic and creative experiences, there's just something missing. On the one side, we have the people you want to serve, and on the other side, we have what you offer them. But the bit that's missing is who you are. Who are you? What are you like? Can I trust you? If I'm going to buy something from you, I want to know what you stand for. Are your values aligned with mine? If I asked you to give me words that you associate with some of these brands, I'm sure you could do so pretty quickly and probably pretty accurately. What these brands have done well is communicate their values to you clearly. And by consistently doing this in conjunction with a simple logo, it's a shorthand for the values they've managed to persuade you of. So when you see the Lego logo, you probably think of words like fun, creativity, and Nike, energy, ambition, and success. The logo is not the brand. It's the shorthand for the brand. So you need to be clear what underpins it. These are the values that you will hold for a long period of time and be consistent with. And these values will underpin the communications you create, regardless of whether your products and services change over time. So I've slightly rejigged this diagram now. We've got who you are for, your target audiences, what you offer, your proposition, and now who you are, your brand personality. The questions you need to answer here are really important. They're more about what you stand for as an organisation over time. Brands don't change their core values very often, so it's worth spending some time on this and getting it right. And you need to get everyone in the organisation on board. Instead of what you do, you need to ask, what do we want to be known for? Remember, a brand is shorthand, it's not a prospectus. So you need to decide what your thing is and communicate that relentlessly. You've probably already done some work on your organisational values. But what are the values you want to be known for, and how are you going to communicate that? Could you articulate that in a short sentence, for example? I'm going to show you some examples of companies who do this really well. Here's an example of a major consumer brand and their brand strategy. So Pampers are really clear who their target audience is. It's mothers with babies under 2 years old. Obviously, they sell nappies to dads as well, but their focus for their brand proposition is on mothers with babies under 2 years old. Their proposition, what's in it for the mother? Well, it's going to keep your baby's skin drier than any other nappy. That's what they're claiming. And if they're claiming that, what evidence do they provide that that is true? And that's where the science bit comes in on the advert. Pampers' specially developed lock-away core soaks up moisture and prevents it from coming into contact with skin. Science bit. Then there's the brand character, which is caring and affectionate, like a mother who's caring for their baby. And their strap line or selling line, which is supposed to be the shortest encapsulation of all of that, is Pampers for drier, happier babies. And because they have it so clearly defined, it guides everything they communicate. The colours and logos are designed to look soft and comforting. The images reinforce the brand values, and the ads work hard to communicate the key brand values. So the clearer you can be about who your target audiences are, how you meet their needs, and who you are and what you stand for, the easier and cheaper it's going to be to develop these into powerful communications. And it's quite interesting looking at Pampers' social media channels because they use those to build their community brand values. And they're more about that than they are about flogging nappies. Lots of charity work on them that Pampers is involved in, as well as supporting parents in the everyday challenges of parenting. Importantly, it's not full of behind-the-scenes nappy-making technology videos, which I'm sure plenty of people at Pampers are interested in, but their target audience absolutely isn't. So back to the difference between brand level and product level marketing. Here's a few examples of what I mean. Spotify are the queens of brand advertising. Spotify's brand or selling line is music for every mood, but they also do in-app ads to push you into the action bit of the AIDA model. IKEA, again, use lots of brand advertising to make you love IKEA. Their shorthand is the wonderful everyday. But then they have very specific product advertising, which still retains the brand values, but is actually flogging you a bed and has the price on it. And finally, there's this new rebrand of Rambert Dance, which I love. This ad is really selling the personality of the brand. It's not selling a specific event, but there is a clear call to action on it. Their selling line is, it's your move, which in itself is a call to action. And they've put the dates of when they're performing very prominently on the ad. So then we're going to move into the final bit of this session, which is about if it's worked. Has it all been worth it? How do we know if what we're doing is succeeding? This is what's called by people like me, monitoring and evaluation. I think there are three main areas in which you need to measure success that are linked to the areas we've just been talking about. And, spoiler alert, it's a really good idea to know before you start what you're going to measure at the end. It's much, much easier. And believe me, I'm the person doing the evaluation for Birmingham 2022 Festival. Firstly, let's look at the people who engaged with what you did. You need to know stuff about them. Who were they? Had they seen you before, or were they brand new? Are they the people and the types of people that you set out to reach in the first place? Of course, if you hadn't defined who those people were at the start, you'll have no clue whether they are the people that you were going to reach. Why do we need to know this stuff? Well, firstly, it can help you tell stories about the work that you do to the people that it affects, which will help you get more funding, but it will also help you tell your brand story. It can help you understand those people's needs more and refine what you do so that you can create more things that excite more people even more. We'll come on to how you might do that in a bit. Secondly, you need to know about the marketing and promotional activity you did and whether it was worth the time and money that you invested in it. It's notoriously difficult to work out if marketing has worked, but there's a few things that can really help. And finally, you need to know some of the more qualitative things about what you did. What impact or effect did it have on the people who engaged with it? Did they get what you had promised them? And what do they feel about you, your brand and your values and their experience of you? These answers will help you create a story around your organisation and your work. This will help you demonstrate impact and relevance to funders, and it will help you communicate better with people about what you do and why you do it. So firstly, the people. We want to find out who we've reached and if they're the people that we wanted to reach. Let's look at where you might get some of that information from. In this case, it's pretty much ticketing or booker data and or post-show surveys. You don't need to find out everything about them, but some basic data such as postcode will tell you a lot about them. Not only where they come from, but by using tools such as Audience Finder and some profiling tools, you can find out their socioeconomic profile and what their level of cultural engagement is usually like. Then we need to know, did our marketing activity work? Did some things work better than others? Could we spend our money and our time better by doing different things? The sort of tools you might use to measure this are things like Google Analytics, any ticketing or CRM system that you or the venues that you're in operate, and again, post-event surveys, asking people how they heard about the event. I've put some top tips in here about where you might find training or resources on these. So things like Google Analytics training is worth looking at. And if you are performing in a venue box officers will often be able to run you lots of reports to give you some of this information. And then finally, the impact of our work. What effect or impact did our work have on the people that saw it? How do they feel about our brand and what they experienced? The sorts of tools that you could use to measure this: social media, comments, engagement, and again, post-event surveys asking about customer satisfaction. It could ask about the personal impact it had on them, their well-being, the artistic impact. It could ask about their likelihood to come to something similar or to see your work again, and if they would recommend you to a friend or colleague. So I guess it's over to you now. I really hope this framework is a useful one for you, that you've got a bit more focus about how to approach this. I hope you can start to navigate your way through the crazy and confusing world of arts marketing or engagement or development or whatever you want to call it. I call it arts marketing, by the way. Good luck and keep changing the world.